The Greeks have been identified by many ethnonyms. The most common native ethnonym is Hellen, place, Hellenes. The name Greeks was used by the ancient Romans and gradually entered the European languages through its use in Latin. The mythological patriarch Hellen is the named progenitor of the Greek peoples. His descendants, the Aeolians, Dorians, Achaeans and Ionians, correspond to the main Greek tribes and to the main dialects spoken in Greece and Asia Minor. Among his descendants are also mentioned the Greci and the Macedons. The first Greek-speaking people, called Mycenaeans, are Mycenaean Achaeans by historians, entered present-day Greece sometime in the Neolithic era of the Bronze Age. Homer refers to Achaeans as the dominant tribe during the Trojan War period, usually dated to the 12th–11th centuries BC, using Hellenes to describe a relatively small tribe in Thessaly. The Dorians, an important Greek-speaking group, appeared roughly at the time. According to the Greek tradition, the Greci were renamed Hellenes, probably with the establishment of the Great Amphictyonic League after the Trojan War. When the Romans first encountered Greek colonists in southern Italy, they used the name Greci for the colonists and then for all Greeks. This became the root of all relevant terms in European languages. The Persians used the name Yanas after the Ionians, a Greek tribe who occupied some areas on the coasts of Western Asia Minor, and the term was used later in Hebrews, Arabic, and also by the Turks. The word entered the languages of the Indian subcontinent as the Yona. A unique form is used in Georgian, where the Greeks are called bird-as-any. By late antiquity, the Greeks referred to themselves as Grekoi and Romioi, the latter of which was used since virtually all Greeks were Roman citizens. After 212 CE, the term Hellene became applied to the followers of the polytheistic religion after the establishment of Christianity by Theodosius I. General names of Greece. Most European languages, as well as other languages that have borrowed the name from one of them, use names for Greece that come from the Latin Graecia and Graecus, the name the Romans used for the Greeks, itself from the Greek gamma rho alpha iota kappa omicron sigma. In languages of Middle East and South and Central Asia, the common root is yun, or yn. It is borrowed from the Greek name Ionia, a once Greek region of Asia Minor, and the Ionians. The third form is Hellas, used by a few languages around the world, including Greek. Other forms. Georgian. Brief history. The first people speaking an ancient Proto-Greek language entered mainland Greece during the Neolithic period of the Bronze Age. For the ancient Greek dialects as they presented themselves centuries later, it seems that at least two migrations of Greeks followed. The first of the Ionians and the Aeolians probably in the 19th century BC, and the second of the Dorians probably in the 13th century BC. The first migration resulted in Mycenaean Greek, an archaic Greek language which appears in linear bisyllabic inscriptions, and the second resulted in the Dorian dialect, which displaced the Arcado-Cypriot dialect that seems to be closest to the Mycenaean Greek. The Greeks later called the autochthonous Proto-Greek-speaking people by the names Pelasgians, who have uncertain origins and lived mainly in Thessaly and Epirus, Eteocretans who lived in Crete, and Minians who lived in Boeotia. The tribes later called Aeolians and Ionians established several feudal kingdoms around Greece, and the historians called them Mycenaeans after the most powerful kingdom, Mycenae in Peloponnese, or Mycenaeans Achaeans because in Homer the Achaeans were the dominating tribe in Greece, and the name Achaea that appears in Hittite texts seems to correspond to a thalassocratic country which might be Mycenae, although Homer refers to a union of the Greek kingdoms under the leadership of the king of Mycenae during the Trojan War. There is no evidence that these kingdoms were dominated by a central power. Most of the Mycenaean palaces were destroyed at the end of the 13th century BC. The Greek tradition relates this destruction to the Dorians, but it is suggested that the Dorian invasion was only one of the causes of the Bronze Age collapse in the eastern Mediterranean, as there is no evidence that the newcomers established a different civilization. The destruction was followed by the Greek Dark Ages with very poor archaeological findings, when most occupied areas were deserted, but some areas like Attica occupied by the Ionians remained untouched by the invaders. Several Greek tribes moved to regions of Greece where they acquired different names, and population groups moved through the islands to the western coasts of Asia Minor where they kept the native names Aeolians, Ionians and Dorians. It seems that the myth of Hellen, the patriarch of Hellenes, was invented when the Greek tribes started to separate from each other, and stressed their common origin. The name Hellenes was probably used by the Greeks with the establishment of the Great Amphictyonic League, an ancient association of Greek tribes. According to legend, it was founded after the Trojan War by the eponymous Amphictyon, brother of Hellen. It had 12 founders and was organized to protect the great temples of Apollo in Delphi and of Demeter near Thermopylae. The 12 founders enumerated by ISNI were the Aeonians or Otians, the Boeotians of Thebes, the Dolobes, the Dorians of Sparta, the Ionians of Athens, the Achaeans, the Locrians, the Magnesians, the Malians, the Peribians, the Phocians, the Pythians of Delphi, and the Thessalians. Among the descendants of Hellen are mentioned Aeolus, Ion, Achaeus, Dorus, Gracchus and Macedon. It seems that the Macedonians were a Dorian tribe which stayed behind in Macedonia when the main Dorian tribes moved to the south. Achaeans. The Greek cultural tradition has been continuous for centuries. It has always been centered on those who were wealthy and literate enough to have produced literature and have it preserved. They have defined the Greeks as those being in some ways similar to themselves by descent, speech, culture, or religion. In the earliest surviving literary prose, from the 5th century BC, there is a strong distinction marked between the Greeks and the rest of humankind. Exactly who falls within this wall varies, depending on the century, the observer, and the purpose. The evidence from before this period, such as it is, shows much less trace of any hard distinction between Greeks and the rest of humanity. The surviving samples of Linear B are inventory records, and do not discuss ethnicity. Hesiod's theogony is one great genealogical tree, including gods, men, and monsters, Persians, Latins, and Etruscans. In Homer's Iliad, the Greek allied forces are described under 3 different names, often used interchangeably: Argives, Danaans and Achaeans. Argives is an annotation drawn from the most prominent city of the Achaeans, Argos. Danaus is the name attributed to a Greek mythological character, twin brother of Aegyptus and son of Achero and Belus. Hellenes. There is currently no satisfactory etymology for the name Hellenes. Some scholars assert that the name of the priests of Zeus in Dodona, Seloi, changed to Selenes and then to Hellenes and Hellenes. This theory is based on Aristotle's comments in Meteorologica, where he places ancient Hellas in a Epirus between Dodona and the Achelous River, where in his opinion the great deluge of Deucalion must have occurred. The land was inhabited by Seloi and Graresi, who later came to be known as Hellenes. In that regard, Graici was a native name of a Dorian tribe in Epirus which was used by the Illyrians. Homer mentions that the Seloi were the prophets of Zeus at Dodona, but he is referring to Zeus of Dodona as god of the Pelasgians, who were pre-Dorian populations. It is possible that the extension of a particular cult of Zeus in Dodona caused the name to further extend to the rest of the peninsula. However, this theory connects the name Hellenes with the Dorians who occupied Epirus, and the relation with the name Greeks given by the Romans becomes uncertain. The toponyms, especially in ancient city Hellas in southern Thessaly and the Greek tradition, indicate that the name Hellenes is pre-Dorian and that it is more likely that the homeland of the Graikoi, who were later called Hellenes, was in central Greece. The Greek tradition mentions an earlier deluge of Ogyges in the region of Boeotia, which was occupied by the Minyans, a group of autochthonous or Proto-Greek speaking people. The region was called Graik in ancient times, probably after the old city of Graea on the coast. Homer refers to Hellenes as an originally relatively small tribe settled in Thessalic-The. During the era of the Trojan War they were centered along the settlements of Aeolos, Alloptraches, and the Pelasgi in Argos. This Homeric Hellas is expressly described as Kappa Alpha Lambda Lambda Iota Gamma Upsilon Nu Alpha Iota Kappa Omicron Sigma Caligenikos, of beautiful women, and its warriors, the Hellenes, along with the feared Myrmidons, were under the command of Achilles. The Parian Chronicle mentions that Thea was the homeland of the Hellenes and that this name was given to those previously called Greeks. Altman also refers that the mothers of Hellenes were Graikoi. In Greek mythology, Hellen, the patriarch of Hellenes, was son of Deucalion, who ruled around Thea with Pyrrha, the only survivors after the Great Deluge. It seems that the myth was invented when the Greek tribes started to separate from each other in certain areas of Greece, and it indicates their common origin. The name Hellenes was probably used by the Greeks with the establishment of the Great Amphictyonic League. This was an ancient association of Greek tribes with 12 founders which was organized to protect the great temples of Apollo in Delphi and of Demeter near Thermopylae. According to legend, it was founded after the Trojan War by the eponymous Amphictyon, brother of Hellen. Greeks. The modern English noun Greek is derived from the Latin gra-esi, which in turn originates from ancient Greek gamma rho alpha iota kappa omicron sigma. It seems that the word is related with the Greek word gamma epsilon rho omega nu geron, old man, via Proto-Greek asterisk gera, old age, also related to Mycenaean Greek era, geris, gift of honor. The Germanic languages borrowed the name with an initial K sound, which was probably their initial sound closest to the Latin G. Aristotle used the term Graikos related with Hellenes and claimed that it was the name originally used by the Illyrians for the Dorians in Epirus, from Gray, native name of the people of Epirus. He places ancient Hellas in the region of Aeolus River around Dodona, where in his opinion the great deluge of Deucalion must have occurred. The priests of Zeus in Dodona were called Seloi, which could lead to Selenes and then to Hellenes. However, the toponyms and the Greek tradition indicate that it is more possible that the homeland of the Greeks was originally in central Greece and that the name was probably pre-Dorian. A Greek legend is referring to an older deluge of Ogyges in Boeotia, in the region occupied by the Minyans, which are considered autochthonous, a Proto-Greek speaking people. The region outside of Attica, including Boeotia, was called Graik, and the word Ogyges related with ocean came to mean from earliest days. Homer is referring to Hellenes as a relative small tribe in Thea in central Greece. In the Parian Chronicle is mentioned that Thea was the homeland of Hellenes and that this name was given to those previously called Graikoi. In Greek mythology, Hellen, the patriarch of Hellenes, was son of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the only survivors after the Great Deluge. Hesiod is referring to Graecus, son of Pandora, who was sister of Hellen. Altmann mentions that the mothers of Hellenes were Graikoi. The German classical historian Georg Husserl derived the name from Graikos, inhabitant of Graea, a town on the coast of Boeotia. The name Graea is derived from Proto-Greek grauge, old lady. Homer, while reciting the Boeotian forces in the Iliad's catalogue of ships, provides the first known reference to a region named Graea, and Pausanias mentions that the ancient city of Tanagra was for a time called Graea, adding that no one knows where this Graea really was. Aristotle thought it was near Oropus, further east on the same coast as Delion. Husserl claimed that the name was given by the Romans originally to the Greek colonists from Graea who helped to found Cumae, the important city in southern Italy where the Latins first encountered the Greeks, and then to all Greeks. Spread of the use of the term Hellenes. Hellenes in the wider meaning of the word appears in writing for the first time in an inscription by Aeschylombrotus, dedicated to Heracles for his victory in the Amphictyonic Games, and refers to the 48th Olympiad. After the Greco-Persian Wars, an inscription was written in Delphi celebrating victory over the Persians and calling Pausanias the leading general of the Hellenes. Awareness of a pan-Hellenic unity was promoted by religious festivals, most significantly in the Eleusinian Mysteries, in which prospective initiates had to speak Greek, and almost as importantly through participation in the 4 pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympic Games, in which participants were recognized by tribal affiliation. Only Greek men were allowed to participate, the occasional exception in later times, such as that made for Emperor Nero, was a sure sign of Roman political hegemony. The tribal societies of the North. The development of mythological genealogies of descent from eponymous founder figures, long after the actual southward migration of the 4 tribal groups recognized by the Greeks, affected how the identity of northern tribes was perceived. According to the most prevailing legend, Hellen, son of Deucalion and Pyrrha, received from the nymph Orsis 3 sons, Aeolus, Doris, and Zeuthus, each of whom founded a primary tribe of Hellas, the Aeolians, Dorians, Achaeans and Ionians. At the time of the Trojan War, the Epirots were not considered Hellenes, for the peoples so named were then limited to a small tribe in Thessaly of which Achilles was a member. After the name was extended to all peoples south of Mount Olympus, however, it still left out those of common origin living in the north. One factor contributing to this was the non-participation in the Persian Wars, which were considered a vital affair for all Hellenes. Subsequent to the Persian Wars, representatives of these tribes were accepted in the Olympic Games and competed alongside other Hellenes. The fact that each of these northern peoples at this time continued to live as an ethnos, or collection of tribes, under an archaic monarchical political system, as opposed to the democratic or oligarchic polis of the south, also contributed to this view of them as barbaric. Thucydides calls the Acarnanians, Aetolians, Epirots and Upper Macedonians barbarians, but as so in a strictly linguistic sense, these peoples were considered barbariphone to the extent that the dialects of Greek were sufficiently different and archaic so as to sound crude and barely understandable to a southern Attic speaker such as Thucydides. Similarly, when the Athenian orator Demosthenes called Philip II of Macedon worse than a barbarian in his 3rd Philippic, he did so with respect to the culture they demonstrated as foreigners not adhering to proper Hellenic standards, and did not raise the issue of their origin. Not only no Greek, nor related to the Greeks, but not even a barbarian from any place that can be named with honors, but a pestilent knave from Macedonia, whence it was never yet possible to buy a decent slave. Herodotus, Polybius, Strabo and a large number of other Greek and Roman writers regard the tribes of Western Hellas, Epirus, and Macedonia as Hellenic in every respect. It is also interesting to note that both Thucydides and Demosthenes were themselves of partial non-Attic origins, and for Demosthenes it seems of non-Greek origins altogether, while notably both of them held strong opposing political positions against Macedonians, Hellenes and barbarians. In the following centuries, Hellene typically contrasted with barbarian, representing the uncivilized. The Greek tribes quickly noticed that they did not speak the same tongue as the neighbors, and used the term beta alpha rho omicron sigma for them, with the meanings uncultured, uncivilized, or speaker of a foreign language. The term beta alpha rho omicron sigma is thought to be onomatopoeic in origin. I.e., stammering, may have been how the speech of foreign peoples sounded to Greek speakers. This was also the case for the Egyptians, who, according to Herodotus, named barbarians all those who spoke a different tongue, and in later years for the Slavs, who gave the Germans the name Nemic, which means mute, while calling themselves Slavinsky, or people of the word. In his play The Birds, Aristophanes calls the illiterate supervisor a barbarian, who nevertheless taught the birds how to talk. The term eventually picked up a derogatory use and was extended to indicate the entire lifestyle of foreigners, and finally coming to mean illiterate or uncivilized in general. Thus, an illiterate man is also a barbarian. According to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Hellene differed from a barbarian in 4 ways: refined language, education, religion, and the rule of law. Greek education became identified with noble upbringing. Paul of Tarsus considered it his obligation to preach the gospel to all men, Hellenes and barbarians, both wise and foolish. Discrimination between Hellenes and barbarians lasted until the 4th century BC. Euripides thought it plausible that Hellenes should rule over barbarians, because the first were destined for freedom and the other for slavery. Aristotle came to the conclusion that the nature of a barbarian and a slave is one and the same. Racial differentiation faded away through the teachings of Stoics, who distinguished between nature and convention and taught that all men have equal claim before the gods and thus by nature cannot be unequal to each other. With time, and at least in some cases, Hellene, to use the words of Isocrates, became a trait of intellect, not race. Alexander the Great's conquests consolidated Greek influence in the East by exporting Greek culture into Asia and permanently transformed education and society in the region. Isocrates declared in his speech Panegyricus, speaking about Athens and Greece, "And so far has our city distanced the rest of mankind in thought and in speech that her pupils have become the teachers of the rest of the world, and she has brought it about that the name Hellenes suggests no longer a race but an intelligence, and that the title Hellenes is applied rather to those who share our culture than to those who share a common blood." With a small reformation, the Hellenistic civilization is the evolution of classical Greek civilization into a civilization with global proportions, this time open to everybody. Similarly, Hellene evolved from a national name signifying an ethnic Greek to a cultural term signifying anybody who conducted his life according to Greek mores. Unani and Yavin, a wholly different term, came to establish itself in the East. The ancient people of the Middle East referred to the Hellenes as Yunan, deriving from Persian Yurna, itself a loan of Greek iota omega nu iota alpha, the western coast of Asia Minor. It is by affiliation with the Ionian tribe the Persians conquered in the late 6th century BC that the name extended to all Hellenes. All peoples under Persian influence adopted the term, and it is from this root that Sanskrit Yavana derives, which one encounters in ancient Sanskrit sources, first attested in Panini's grammar, and later referring, together with Pali Yona, Yonaki, to the Indo-Greeks. The term Yunan is used in current Persian, Arabic, Azeri, Turkish, Hindi, Indonesian and Malay. The related Hebrew name Javan or Javan was used to refer to the Greek nation in the eastern Mediterranean in early biblical times. There was an eponymous character Javan mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 2. In later times it was used for all Hellenistic kingdoms. Yavan is still the name used for modern Greece in contemporary Israel, although the contemporary Chinese term for Greece is based on Hellas. Chinese previously used what was likely a version of the Yunan or Iona root when referring to the Dayuan. The Dayuan were probably the descendants of the Greek colonies that were established by Alexander the Great and prospered within the Hellenistic realm of the Seleucids and Greco-Bactrians, until they were isolated by the migrations of the Uhe around 160 BC. It has been suggested that the name Yuan was simply a transliteration of the words Yunan, Iona, or Ionians, so that Dayuan would mean Great Yunans or Great Ionians.